Over the past year of study, we have learned how to teach content to meet standards and objectives. We've spent considerable amounts of time learning how to differentiate content. But one thing that we have not done a lot of is investigate the narratives surrounding education as a profession. So one class, Critical Inquiry into the Foundational Narratives of Schooling, did just that. And since we took that class last year, I have been curious about learning more and more about the subject of education and exactly where its roots come from, among other things. A few aspects that I want to learn more about are the philosophical and ethical principles and practices and trajectory of the current American and global education systems. These are large topics to explore with a lot of different problems and ideas embedded within them. But I try to parse out and pick the most relevant for this project. Robinson writes a sprawling historic narrative about education systems, past and present, and makes projections into the future. He focuses heavily on the Western tradition of education. He begins by going all the way back to ancient Greece and talking about classical education through the Middle Ages up until now with the current information superhighway of the internet. Robinson plots out this course to show the similarities and differences between the ancient Greek education, Middle Age grammar schools, the Renaissance and Enlightenment era, as well as our current, as he calls it, industrial education system. Besides being a well-constructed historical story about education, Robinson's premise seeks to realign and inject aspects of what a classical era education was into teaching and educational practices today. Focusing heavily on the Trivium, Robinson also rounds his story out by affiliating and describing how teachers can explicitly use the classical Trivium to bring out the best possible learning outcomes for students. Before I explain practical implications and go into the INTAF standards, let me explain what the Trivium actually is. And I'm going to have this picture of Aristotle up to comfort me while I do this explanation. So, the Trivium is based on three components. You have grammar, you have dialectic, and rhetoric. And if you can think of it, I'll put up this little infographic of a tree. Grammar is the most basic stage. It's the roots of knowledge. So young kids up until about middle school soak up knowledge, memorize facts. Dialectic is the next step. It's about where the trunk and lower branches are. So students now have an understanding of the knowledge and they're starting to ask why and how. So this is where you question the knowledge to seek out some sort of truth or value in what you have learned. So this occurs during the middle grades. And lastly, you have rhetoric. Rhetoric is the top of the tree, so it is the fruit of what grammar and dialectic have given to a student. Rhetoric is explaining, it's persuading, it is presenting, it's showing knowledge in an effective way. Grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric are the skills that Robinson wants to integrate into 21st century skills. He argues that these skills, while they do exist in some way, they are not as explicit as they once were taught. And to teach them again alongside modern technology and practices could be very fruitful and beneficial for students and teachers alike. Back in 2012, the Institute for Public Policy Research came up with a formula that would generate a well-educated citizen. Their formula was knowledge plus thought plus leadership multiplied by ethics equals well-educated. Robinson looks at this idea and he kind of runs with it as a framework for how the Trivium could be implemented in the 21st century. Practices include creating authentic curriculum that builds on student interests, backwards design, understanding prior knowledge is key, so making sure students at least come pretty close to mastering content and knowledge before they go on to the next grade or step, and a de-emphasis on assessment, but implementing more project-based learning situations where students can show their learning rather than regurgitate facts. In Task Standard 3, Learning Environments is all about building positive learning communities and environments where students can communicate freely and openly without fear of repercussion. Robinson's book cites that this is a crucial thing for teachers to do. In Task Standard 5 is application of content. Robinson writes extensively about how teachers should no longer be the gatekeepers of knowledge, but rather they should be a guiding and facilitating force in the classroom to help students acquire and master content. Trivium 21C is a reflective book and asks educators to consider the past when making judgment of current and future teaching practices. In Task Standard 9, Professional Learning and Ethical Practice asks teachers to do this as well, to engage with ongoing ways to develop their teaching practice, acquire new skills, as well as adapt teaching practices to new knowledge. Robinson's book and Standard 9 align well in this area.